With the Miami Dolphins choosing to run it back in the football operations department in 2025, it gives us a significant sample size of how we may expect this team to tackle several critical challenges this offseason. We're looking today at multi-year free agents.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and the NFL Draft lead for the 33rd team. I want to give a welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it. We live it here on Locked On Network. And if you're not an everydayer, welcome to the program. Hope you become one here with us today. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets. If you win your first bet, visit FanDuel.com to get started. Looking at multi-year free agents. And this is something that the NFL, known as the not for long league, right? NFL, get it? There's a lot of turnover on rosters on an annual basis. And the Dolphins, the past couple of years, because they have not made a lot of draft picks prior to 2024, between 2022 and 2023, and because they financed or they sold those for players with top of market contracts. And when you get a surplus of top of market contracts, that means the rest of the roster has to be filled out by smaller contracts and typically more short-term contracts that you try to piece around the pillars on your roster. But I would imagine this is the year you're going to start to see a little bit of a swing of that pendulum back the other way, because too much of anything is not sustainable. And the Dolphins started that process last year by making a first-round pick, which was a very nice change of pace. And that player looks to be a success story for the Dolphins with Chop Robinson and the season that he had, particularly in the back half of the season. But most teams, most of their free agents are one-year contracts. The contracts that really, I think, define the free agent class in any class, and I'm not just talking about the Dolphins here. I'm talking about from a team-building perspective. Who are the players that you have enough conviction in to give multi-year commitments to? Multiple years of guaranteed money, 3, 4, 5-year contracts. Those are the marquee investments and the big investments, and I think the defining signings of any given free agency class. And that is something for Miami that, as you look across the recent history, there's been a very clear shift and evolution in how they have approached free agency, in part because they've had a mature roster with a lot of top of market contracts. But again, that pendulum started to swing the other way this past year as well. So what we're going to do here today on the show is we're going to look at 5-year sample size of free agent, multi-year contracts given out to free agents that are coming over from other teams, what the trends look like there, what the recent history of that data is, who are the success stories, who are the failures out of that group, and then we're going to look at how it impacts potentially the 2025 season. But the first thing that I wanted to start with, it's a quote from Mike Vrabel, who's the new head coach of the New England Patriots. And this is extremely true on a league-wide scale. You did the state media with the Patriots after his introductory press conference yesterday. He was asked something about free agency, and his response was, the only thing free agents care about is green, and it's not natural grass. Which, case in point, and he continues on, 2 different kinds of free agency. The first one is trying to go out and maximize your earning potential. You see that in the first couple of days, maybe the first week of free agency. That's the rat race and the legal tampering period. And Miami has generally stayed away from that bucket in the entirety of the 5-year sample size. I remember when they met the deal with Terron Armstead in 2022, and that was the biggest contract that they've given out since 2020. That didn't come into place until like Friday of that week either, if I remember correctly. So they have generally stayed away from being hyperactive in the legal tampering window. But Mike Vrabel said after the first week, it comes down to opportunity. If you want the best opportunity to produce and contribute, and that can lead to the next form of free agency. It's an important distinguishment. And again, this is a league-wide thing. This isn't just like, I'm not just talking about this through the Dolphins and applying a Patriots coach quote to the Dolphins. This is for all 32 teams. This is applicable. The first wave, I actually expect, ironically enough, a team like New England to be very active in because they do need to find and jumpstart putting talent onto the roster, and they have the most cap space in the league. And that, conveniently enough, falls directly in line with the 5-year sample size that we have for the Dolphins in free agency with multi-year contracts. So not 1 year, $5 million deals, not 1 year, $1.79 million deals that don't qualify for the compensatory for. None of that stuff. All that stuff we did last year. No gamifying the system. Multiple years of commitments and big dollars. The year the Dolphins did that the most was in 2020 because they were coming off of the 2019 teardown year and they had monopoly money like nobody's business to spend, and they went 5-4 in the final 9 games and wanted to put a competitive roster on the field. And I don't think it's a coincidence that that is the least return on investment that you've had in the past 5 years from a free agency class. Because you committed more dollars and didn't get the long-term benefits because you got caught up in the first wave of free agency. So we'll go over the 2020 group now. And then I want to look at the rest of it separate because I do think coming off of 2019, that 2020 free agency class was a very different circumstances than the rest of the window of time that we're going to be looking at for this exercise. If you don't remember the names, it was Byron Jones, 5 years, $82.5 million. Kyle Van Noy, 4 years, $51 million. That contract actually would have looked pretty good if he wasn't a cap casualty and butted heads with Brian Flores after the first year. And you saw the darn thing through because he just posted like 13 sacks for the Ravens this year. Shaq Lawson, 3 years, $30 million. Eric Flowers, 3 years, $30 million. Clayton Fejedelem, special teams safety, 2 years, $8.5 million. Emmanuel Agba, 2 years, $15 million. And Jordan Howard, 2 years, $9.75 million. That class, no bueno, if we're being honest, but that's the price you pay when you are a totally torn down team and you have to get involved. Then you don't have a lot of the other appeal. So the players you have to attract are the ones that only care about green and not natural grass. Unfortunately, Byron Jones has an injury. He's never really the same after his first, 2 seasons. Never plays again. Kyle Van Noy made it 1 year, was a cap casualty because the COVID pandemic pushed the cap back down. Shaq Lawson was a fine player, and you didn't break the bank at $10 million per season for him and Eric Flowers, but Flowers made it 1 year, and then he was back out of here. Jordan Howard didn't even make it through the season. Fejedelem hung around as a special teams guy, but that was like the APY on that deal was $4.25 million, so it wasn't really a big investment. Your best contract, frankly, was probably Emmanuel Agba for 2 years, 15 as a 26-year-old defensive end at the time. That's the risk. And the good news is Miami's not going to play in this end of the pool, regardless if they wanted to or not, because of the other investments that they have made with internal players on contract extensions like Zach Sealer and Austin Jackson and Jalen Waddle and Tua Tagovailoa in the past, 18 months? I think all those guys signed. Sealer might have been a little bit before that. And then you have Jalen Ramsey, who was brought in externally, and Tyreek Hill. You got to figure out what you're doing with that contract, and you got to figure out what you're doing with the Bradley Chubb contract. We'll talk a little bit more about Terron Armstead in the next segment. But that's a how-to of how to go about free agency in a way that is a first-class ticket to giving more financial commitments than probably what is going to be ideal fits for your roster. And that is one thing as I look at what the rest of this sample size looks like for multi-year contracts given out in free agency, some interesting trends and shifts that I think gives you some optimism when you look at what the free agency class looks like in 2025 and where there might be some overlap and some opportunity for the Dolphins. And that's all the kinds of things we're going to be looking at here on this episode. Make sure you guys stick with us. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets. If you win your first bet, that's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate. There's a variety of bets that keep the game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly, so there's no sitting and waiting around for your winnings. Now, we are not betting on Dolphins playoff games, but if you're still looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs this season, FanDuel has you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. $5 bet gets you $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So the next 4 years of multi-year free agent contracts given. 2021 was a modest year after the purge and spend of 2020. The only two players that got multi-year contract extensions or multi-year contracts from other teams to come to Miami was Adam Butler, interior rotational pass rush defensive tackle, 2 years, $7.5 million. And Ethan Carter, the free agent tight end H move piece that never really clicked into place, had a really ugly concussion, unceremoniously ended his time in Miami. But that was a 3-year, $7.8 million contract at the time it was signed in 2021. That's it for multi-year commitments. Now, of course, this is now going to get put up against an overlay of the 2020 and 2021 draft classes and all the first-round picks and the top 100 picks and the infusion of those players. And it makes sense that you would be a little bit less active in that after the original splurge in spending, if you're being honest, and a lot of contracts that very quickly did not age gracefully for you, if we're being honest. Butler was a fine player here. Ethan Carter was a flop, but there was injury element of that, and he was never really intended to be anything other than another Clayton Fejedelem special teams type player who maybe intermittently gets involved in the offense, right? So very low long-term investment in free agency in 2021. And then 2022 comes and there's a coaching change, and it's become abundantly clear that the offense needs to get a lot better. So they come out and they give 5 contracts with more than 1 year on the deal to offensive players. And that's 5 out of 6 in 2022. Terron Armstead, 5 years, $75 million max value in that contract. Cedric Wilson, of course, this was about a couple weeks before Tyreek Hill became available, and the team traded for Tyreek Hill, signed a 3-year, $22 million contract as a 26-year-old wide receiver. And frankly, I don't think it would have mattered if Tyreek Hill was available or not. Seeing what Cedric looked like in his opportunities here, I just don't think it was a good fit. Terron, obviously, you knew what you were signing up for the contract with the durability, but if Terron Armstead didn't have durability issues, he wouldn't have been available in 2022. And when he's been on the field and in the way that he's contributed outside of outside the lines as far as impressing himself and his leadership onto a really young unit, I think that's been money very well spent for Miami. And I don't think he's collected more than $15.5 million in cash in, I think he did more than $15.5 million in cash once in the 3 years he's been here. And that contract, it's scheduled cash deliverables of about 14.5 in 2025 and 2026. But I think that's one that did age well for you. Now, Keon Crossan is another special teams type player. 3 years, $9.5 million. Is a 25-year-old, another player that got derailed by injuries here, a couple of freak injuries, it was described as. You didn't really see him play all that much. Connor Williams, 2-year, $14 million contract, gave you 2 seasons of really good center play. Unfortunately, had his second season cut before the end of the year with an ugly injury that eventually contributed to him having to rehab and then come back, and then he retires. Kind of tells you where that injury was for Connor Williams. But the 2 years that he was played here, the play was really, really good at center. Same cannot be said for Chase Edmonds, 2 years, $12 million as a 25-year-old running back. He was traded at the trade deadline in 2022. He made a half a season. That and Jordan Howard are the hallmark multi-year running back contracts that are just red flags. And maybe we just keep drafting them, right? Maybe we just draft a running back every year if that's the alternative. And then Alec Ingold got a 2-year, $6.5 million contract. So Terron, Connor Williams, and Alec Ingold, I think, aged very well for Miami. Those contracts did in 2022. And Chase Edmonds, Cedric Wilson aged very poorly. Keon Crossan, an injured player. So a mixed bag, about 50% batting average. 2023, reminder, this is after trading for Tyreek Hill, giving him a big contract. This is after acquiring Bradley Chubb at the trade deadline and then acquiring Jalen Ramsey in this window as well going into 2023. The only multi-year contract they gave out in 2023 was to a backup quarterback, Mike White, 2 years, $8 million. Didn't need to see him play. Was cut after 1 year. So effectively nothing in that window. And it's meh for me. I think it's fine value for a player coming off of what he was with the Jets. And not a bad thing that you never had to see a backup quarterback play. Which brings you to 2024. And the Dolphins gave out 4 contracts in this group with more than 1 year on the contract to players externally that they're bringing in. Jordan Brooks, Aaron Brewer, Jonnu Smith, and Kendall Fuller. 3 of those players, I think, are rousing home run successes. And Jordan Brooks signed 3 years, $26.25 million as a 26-year-old linebacker. Aaron Brewer signed for 3 years, $21 million as a 26-year-old center. Outstanding scheme fit for Jonnu Smith. Signed 2 years, $8.4 million. Would not be surprised if he signs a contract extension when it's all said and done this offseason. They did that with Raheem Mostert the previous year. And then Kendall Fuller, 2 years, $15. I think he was a solid, sturdy corner in the early portions of the season, but suffered 2 concussions and then had another injury that ended his year on IR. And after the second concussion, when he came back, I thought he looked a step slow, and it really started to look like he was slowing down a little bit. So I would put Fuller in the meh category. But I'd put Brooks, Brewer, and Smith in the same conversation as Terron Armstead, Connor Williams, and Alec Ingold, as I think those are all highly successful free agents given out, contracts given out in the last 4 years since the splurge in 2020, because you had the dollars to spend and needed to field a competitive roster. So in total, over the last 4 years, that leaves you with, I think, 6 rousing successes. Armstead, Williams, Ingold, Brooks, Brewer, Jonnu Smith. I think you have 3 meh players, Mike White, Kendall Fuller, and Adam Butler, who is a fine rotational player here, but not a real big needle-moving type talent. And then 4 players that I would describe as failed signings in this stretch. Cedric Wilson, Keon Crossan, Chase Edmonds, and Ethan Carter. Now, part of the moral of the story here is let's stop spending top-of-market free agent special teams dollars, because, like, Saron Neal signed a 1-year deal here. He didn't work out particularly well for the Dolphins either. Is this a Danny Crossman subtweet? I don't know. But there's been a lot of opportunities given for players with significant money to come in and be prominent special teams players for the Dolphins, and it's almost never worked. You find some young talent and get those guys in here and have them play teams instead. Take advantage of those late-round draft picks that are going towards offensive linemen that don't make a 53-man roster, right? The Ryan Hayeses of the world. And you get a guy that can run down and cover kicks, be a special teams demon. Those are some questions I would be asking, especially if the team keeps 3 7th-round picks as they're currently scheduled to have. and 2 5s and 2 4s. Like that's the kind of stratosphere where maybe you get some upside swings in there. But those roles can also be dedicated to players that are going to play special teams and prevent you from having to spend in free agency on kind of a marquee special teams type guy that then in turn doesn't live up to the dollars that you're committing to get him in and be a central special teams guy. Like Duke Riley kind of fits in that world too. So 6 successes, 3 middle of the road, 4 failures, in my opinion, for the last 4 years of multi-year free agent contracts that have been given out. But there's some more notables here as far as dollars and commitments and averages of players and who they've traditionally gone after in this window of time that I think can paint the picture that's going to be very helpful for a team that I think is probably going to have the spending power to add another 3, 4, 5 players of this type of caliber when the league year starts, as long as you stay out of the rat race of the first couple of days. Now, if you have total conviction in a singular player and it's a top of market player and you want to go for it, they're going to have the flexibility to do it. And if you want to have conviction there, and I would say, half of their free agents this window have been offensive linemen. Do you like a guard? You want to go that route? If you do, I can live in that world, especially when the alternative is drafting and developing talent. And there's so much more unknown versus proof of concept of playing at the NFL level. But I digress. There's a lot of different ways this conversation go from here. Where I want to go is, what are the trends, the averages of some of the numbers here, and then what does it mean for the 2025 class? That's going to be up next here on Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. Growing your small business in 2025 comes down to how well you hire. Let's face it, better hire starts with smarter insights. That's what we're hoping to do here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. It's also where LinkedIn comes in for you and your small business. With all the strongest hiring data available, LinkedIn helps you identify the right candidates, giving you the confidence to make the best decisions for you and your business. Small businesses have to wear a lot of hats, so every hire is crucial. LinkedIn gets that, and that's why they connect you with the best candidates, giving data that you won't find anywhere else. From unique skills to interests to the connections that you share, LinkedIn helps you find the right person for the job. 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn has helped them find high-quality candidates. Hire smarter this year and find your next great hire on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. So I did some average work on some of these numbers, and the average age of multi-year commitments over the last 4 years is 26 and a half years old, which is good. I think that's a good thing, because when we talk about what this team needs more of, you talk about competition in every room and creating a sense of urgency, and you want young and hungry. And a lot of guys that are going to be hitting free agency aren't guys that came into the league and just totally knocked it out of the park when they first stepped foot on an NFL field, right? Maybe there's some developmental patterns that maybe they showed signs of late in their rookie contract, but a team doesn't quite know. Maybe it's a player like a Javon Holland from another team, right, who showed a lot of promise early, but then maybe kind of plateaued a little bit. And the team's not quite sure, what do we want to commit to this player? 26 and a half years old, you're going to get a lot of players that are, if they're hitting free agency, they're probably going to have some sense of urgency that they've reached the end of their rookie window, and they're looking for the right opportunity to go back to that thing that Mike Vrabel said. We don't want free agents that care about green and it's not natural grass. We want players that want the best opportunity to produce and contribute. And I think that's what this team got last year with Jonnu Smith. It's what this team got last year with Aaron Brewer, and it's what this team got last year in Jordan Brooks. Jonnu wasn't coming off a rookie contract, but he kind of pinballed around for a little bit, and the narrative on him was kind of growing stale. When Brewer and Brooks, those were both 26-year-old players coming in and getting solid money, between $7 and $9 million per season APY for both of those guys. the average total, or the average APY of contracts given out in the last 4 years, and that includes the Mike Whites of the world and the Ethan Carters of the world and the Adam Butlers of the world and the Alec Ingalls of the world, in addition to the Jordan Brookses, the Aaron Brewers, the Terron Armsteads. It's about $7 million per year is the total value, or is the APY, or the average per year of these multi-year free agent contracts for players coming from other teams. So you're talking mostly middle tier free agents that are coming off of rookie contracts. 26 years old, $7 million per. And that ironically is right the sweet spot what they hit with both Jordan Brooks and Aaron Brewer. And I think you should aspire to have that. And I think they're going to have spending power that's somewhere between $25 million and $40 million, depending on what Terron Armstead chooses to do, and depending on what they do with Tyreek Hill, and depending on what they do with Bradley Chubb. Because I've run a number of different like contract restructure and player ingoing, outgoing simulations for scheduled free agents that you bring back, players that you want to restructure and keep on the team, players that you want to designate as post-June first cuts, or if Terron Armstead retires or he doesn't retire, all that kind of stuff. I'm doing all that kind of stuff on my own just to kind of familiarize myself with the different possible avenues. And I can get this Dolphins team, depending on like outcomes, between $30 and $40 million in actual cap space without touching the Tua Tagovailoa contract at all. And if you move on from Tyreek Hill, your concern about rolling cap over by restructuring gets dramatically alleviated, because if you'd move on from Tyreek Hill, you'd free up $52 million in cap space. Now, again, that doesn't make the talent on the roster better, but it opens doors for the right kinds of players to be brought in to complement the nucleus of players that you do have. And if they're going to continue on the trend that they've been on the past 4 years, you can kind of look and say, okay, who's in free agency that plays positions that might be relevant to the Dolphins? Well, you got Jamien Sherwood from the Jets, who's coming off a rookie contract as a 25-year-old linebacker who can run and played well against the Dolphins in some of his opportunities. Or another linebacker in Ernest Jones. What's his potential going to be as a player who's played in a Mike McDonald scheme in the same way that Anthony Weaver applies it somewhere else? Is Asante Samuel Jr. as another corner? Could you move on from Kendall Fuller because you're worried about the health and durability long term? What's the earning potential of Asante Samuel? Does he get priced out of your range? If he does, okay, no worries. You can shift your attention to is Baltimore, what are they going to choose to do with restricted free agent Ardarius Washington, who plays safety and has been a good player for Baltimore this year? Is he going to be available? Are they going to tender him? Are they going to sign him to a long-term contract extension? Does he hit the market? That'd be a player that's of interest, and he's 25. That gets to a potential reclamation quarterback to enter the fray of your quarterback competition for QB2 with a Zach Wilson, who's 25 years old and just had an experience with Sean Payton this year. And if you're going to sign a player like a Zach Wilson as a high tools reclamation type project, I would hope you sign him to a 2-year deal. Don't sign him to a 1-year deal and let him come in here and learn for a year and they bounce out and take the experience and then go pay it off for somebody else. Get him on a 2 or 3 year contract and hopefully lock him in at a decent rate and develop him and pour into him and see if it pays back. And if it doesn't, then you could do what you did with Mike White. But at least with a guy like a Zach Wilson, there's the upside of a first-round pick at the position. And I'm not saying that's your unequivocal answer to QB2. I expect they'll go out and get like an actual veteran too. But that's the kind of player, if they gave a multi-year contract out, I think would make sense. Trayvon Moehrig at safety. They're going to have to remake that entire room. Paulson Adebo at corner from the Saints. Nate Hobbs, corner from the Raiders. Jason Pinnock, safety from the Giants. These are all 25-year-old players scheduled to hit free agency. Trey Smith's in this bucket, coming off a rookie contract. I expect that's a break-the-bank type scenario. I don't know that they're going to go down that path, but if they do, you totally understand why they would choose to do it. Let's see. Got Justin Fields. You got Milton Williams at defensive tackle for the Eagles, who's getting ready to turn 26. Baron Browning at pass rusher from Arizona. you can work your way through this list, and that's where I would narrow my scope and focus is who are the 24, 25, 26-year-old players. Peyton Turner, former first-round pick for the Saints on the defensive line, if you're going to totally overhaul that room. What about tight end Quentin Morris from the Bills? That's a player that's been kind of buried on their depth chart, but has flashed against Miami sometimes as a player who's a young player who would bring some potential healthy competition to a room that needs to get a lot better if the Dolphins are going to improve their run game to the degree in which we need them to, and we want them to. Pass rusher Josh Uche got traded to Kansas City. Drew Dahlman on the offensive line. Can he play guard? Can you evaluate him to play guard? If you do, you want to go that route, that's a player that's in this bucket for you. There's Grant Stewart. We just got done saying let's not pay special teams guys top dollar, but that's a linebacker from the Colts that I think would make a lot of sense to potentially replace Duke Riley on your roster. You want to go the guard route? There's a number of guys that are young coming off rookie contracts. Ben Cleveland from the Ravens is a guy that, hey, maybe is that a swing of the bat you want to pair with a rookie to compete for a starting spot? I think it'd be a better fit or a better opportunity and opportunity to upgrade that spot than what you had with Lee Meikenberg last year in a key spot. Same could be said for Josh Myers, who was the Packers starting center, had an injury scare in the playoff loss to the Eagles, but he could play guard. Alaric Jackson, an offensive tackle. Nate Herbig from the Pittsburgh Steelers, 26 years old. Malcolm Kuntz, pass rusher, coming off a rookie contract. Like, these are the kinds of names as I'm just sitting here and I'm scrolling, and it's filtered only by age. I'm only looking at age and asking myself, okay, who are players that are at positions of need that fit within this age bucket and demographic that are probably going to be within this spend stratosphere? And I would look and want this team to continue that trend from what they did last year, because they did hit it out of the park. Have the same mentality. Look for the same kinds of players that fit the same profile. And then do what you can to add as many draft picks as you can and ramp this thing up from a competition standpoint and bring in a bunch of players that have multi-year cost control. And suddenly the turnover potential of so many of your players being one-year contract holdovers, that process can be weaned off and get alleviated. But you're paying now for the sins of how you lost the plot back in 2022 when you got all the way away from draft picks, despite the fact that you claim you wanted to build a sustained win. We're going to do a lot of potential free agency stuff, but I thought this was a great opportunity to kind of look at what the Dolphins have done in free agency, give you guys a clear snapshot of the multi-year commitments that they've given out, because again, those I think are the defining players of a free agency class. And there's a lot of things the Dolphins did not do right in 2024. One thing they did do right was the players and the kinds of players they went after and chose to give multi-year and commitments to in free agency off of other teams. And I think that should be applauded. And if they can replicate that again with a higher spending floor and spending ceiling and add more of those kinds of players, not add more expensive players, I think you will see the pendulum start to swing the other way, and you will see this stabilized a little bit as far as the year-over-year state of affairs with the roster. That's going to do it for us here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys, as always, for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. Go Dolphins. I'm out of here.